Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk to you about the hottest topic of all, especially if you're a lone writer or maybe a writer who is just needing some more resources and someone to invest in their team. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Karissa. I am a customer education lead. I am borderline unhealthily obsessed with data analytics or documentation. I've been a documentarian, for about 5.5 years, and I truly believe that peanut butter can be put on pretty much anything and still be delicious. However, but most importantly, I was able to convince my boss to build a docs team. So here's where I would have like the fanfare, like the sirens, like the really cool images of the fire and flames going off. I'm not really good at Final Cut Pro, so all I can do is like whoa, 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 like that, that horn noise, right? Okay, cool. Anyway, cool. I did that, but how did I do it? As of today, this is what my team looks like, right? We're housed in the customer education team, so we cover both documentation and I've recently branched out to e-learning, webinars, video documentation, all that good educational content. I have one content manager who focuses on big documentation projects like new feature releases. He also leads weekly syncs with our team of writers. We have 4 of them who are from the support team. So our support team is made up of individuals who do 50% tickets as well as 50% project work. So we get their project work time. And they're dedicated to updating and creating what my content manager decides needs to be updated. We also have about 210 documents, and I know a lot of documents doesn't mean good documents, right? But this is just to show the amount of documents we're able to maintain at good quality and a quality that our users are getting value. But lastly, and most importantly for our stakeholders, is that we have a self-service score of 40. And now this does vary month to month, but this is our year-to-date average. So if you're not familiar, self-service score is for people with support teams and have documentation that support those support teams. And it's a term coined by Zendesk. What it means is it's the total number of sessions divided by the number of tickets submitted. So it gives you this ratio. So essentially it's telling you in this case, so for every 40 people who visit our documentation, 1 person submits a ticket. And I love this metric because it's easily converted into savings if you know the price per ticket that your support team spends or what they spend when they're answering tickets. So in our case, we have a year-to-date savings of 919,000 euro, and we will hit a million mark by the end of the year. But again, it's that kind of like jaw-dropping, like, oh wow, that is a lot of money saved or a lot of value that the documentation is bringing to our team. And so we will get back to this in a little bit. Well, I'm going to cover this, but it's a really important metric to keep in mind. But it wasn't always like this, right? Back in 2017, I had just started a company in the support team, and there was about 7 of us, I believe. We did tickets, and we also did that project 50-50 work. And one of the first things I noticed and actually based my hiring project on when we were doing my task was the documentation. We had about 107 docs, a growing product, and there was no ownership, like none at all. We had the support, marketers, engineers, and even sometimes upper exec writing documentation. And it was very much a scenario of too many cooks in the kitchen. It was a mix of salesy, technical, both like technical writing and technical and like a developer just straight up writing the code onto the docs. Support writing, but overall it was really confusing for the user. It just wasn't a great journey for them. There was no cohesion. And that is when I decided I was going to own it. I was going to own the documentation. I was going to build a team and just run it, right? Something to keep in mind, 2017 Karissa was a very young, and very naive Karissa. And even though she thought this was going to be a piece of cake and would say things like, oh, it's a slam dunk, little Americanism there. I'll just, I'll just do this. I'll just localize. I'll just, just. And everyone knows how important this is. Thinking that right away people were going to know the value of documentation, know the value of my role, because, right, obviously, spoiler alert, it wasn't the case. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a slam dunk. It wasn't just doing things. And I did have to prove multiple times the value of the documentation. But this isn't a story about how difficult it is. That is for another day, another conference, another talk. This is a story about how. So how did I actually do it? And the steps that I took to achieve my dream team is one, I proved it was time for a team. Two, I ran an audit. I got all the data and I figured it out and presented it. And three, I started collecting the metrics that were important to the stakeholder. So it really was kind of finding the language that was best to communicate with my stakeholder. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through each of these, mainly about the audit, because I think that's really the most important part. We'll chat about what they entail, how you can achieve the same outcome, and what parts of this belong in the business case that you're going to be presenting, and hopefully convince your boss that you do need a docs team and you do need those extra resources. So that brings us to step one, answering the question, when is it time for a team? Essentially, how do you prove it, right? And I find this problem a lot, either within departments that are customer facing or just have a lot of empathy that are built directly into our core. We feel like it's time for a team, or we feel that the problem that users are having is X, Y, and Z. But we don't have the physical receipts. We don't have the data to back it up. Now, this doesn't sound like a problem, right? Because you want empathy. You want to be connected to your user on a level. But the problem comes when you're working with other teams, departments, even upper exec, where the drivers tend to be number or research focused. And don't get me wrong, that's not bad. Number and research focused is ideal. You want this, but you need to make sure that that is key when talking with these members of your company rather than the empathy piece. So you can put yourself in the shoes of an exec and say, okay, this person's presenting this to me. I need to prove that the decision I make, whether yes or no for resources, is valid. So the best way to do that is with numbers, research, competitor analysis, and even business cases. And this is not saying that these teams, departments, and exec don't have an empathy piece. They do. They definitely do. But a lot of their decisions need that hard receipts. They need that hard proof. So let's start with what we already know. Docs are great. We know docs are great. We love docs. We're all about them. But let's convert it into receipts. So did you know that 84% of users stated that they would switch to another brand if their experience using the documentation to answer their product questions were poor? This alone, killer stat. We can put this in the first sentence of our business case if we want to, right? And it helps paint this narrative that we already know. We're a pretty dope group of people. Documentarians got it. We know how to sell the product. We know what site we're running for. And more importantly, not even just selling the product, we can really paint a picture for the user and hold their hands and walk them through the process of using the product and giving them a great user experience. Not only that fact, but did you know that 79% of users expect organizations to offer them a way to self-serve content and find their answers by themselves? 79%. So that means 79% of your users are expecting to have content to help self-serve their needs. Not only that, but if we look at the previous stat, a majority of that 79% will leave, possibly go to a competitor, if the documentation isn't up to par. That's huge. It's massive. That, again, something else that we can make sure to add to the business case or a conversation that we're having with a boss or a stakeholder, member of exec, or just the governing party, if you will, in deciding the future of your team and resources. These stats, little freebies, right? Because we can go online, we can Google this, but we need to get reflective to figure out when it's time for a team on a personal level. Stats are great to look at and everyone else is doing it. You need those stats. But it's easier to persuade and be persuasive in an argument if you can bring it back to yourself and how it applies to you in a whole. So what I did was I sat back and asked myself a few questions. What already exists? So you need to say, what is the current state of my documentation? Do you have 10 docs? Do you have 300 docs? Are they being viewed? Get a base level of what currently exists, but write it for someone who has never seen a doc a day in their life. And this is a huge issue. I have this problem because I feel like there's no way I have specialty knowledge, or I have this special skill set that people don't automatically know. Definition imposter syndrome. But not everybody knows what you know. So you really need to go in and explain the basic blocks of what's going on. And this helps because it makes the stakeholder know what's actually going on and what you're talking about. Whereas if you say, okay, I'm going to give you really short sentences and not explain those basic building blocks of the documentation, you're missing out on the opportunity to really have your point of the importance of your role, your team, or your extra resources to land, and ultimately lean the opposite way of where you want the decision to be made for to have a team. Next, ask yourself, what strength can we build on? So not everything is terrible, right? Maybe if you're a lone rider, things are on fire. You're really, you're stressed, but you're good at what you do. There is some good in what we already have. And even if we're working with borrowed time from other teams, we can highlight our strengths. What are you good at? Do you have killer API documentation? Do you have the quickest turnaround time in the West when it comes to new feature releases? Celebrate your request. Celebrate in your request, right? To let the stakeholder know what wins you're already having and what they're investing in. What can they expect more of if they're investing these resources into your team? What are you lacking? See what documentation is losing readers. Where are the questions coming in? And if you are like a support documentation company, where are you losing engagement and people are reaching out to your support team? Pinpoint at least, let's say, like 2 or 3 quick changes that you can make with some dedicated resources that would improve the content right away. Not significantly improve, but do little improvements. And we can deem these your low-hanging fruits. So something that you can move quickly on and see some change. And this low-hanging fruit list will come in handy because you can keep it over time as you're doing your audits and looking over metrics and kind of build this list of quick wins. What matters most to you right now? So with the user in mind, what do you know that has been bothering them or causing them issues? And, maybe it's not having a getting started section or core features not being documented properly. Point it out and make sure that no matter what, this is the point you want to tackle the most for your user. And lastly, what problems do you want to solve? So what is the point of this potential team or the potential influx of resources? What problem is being solved if you get that extra bandwidth? And this could be highlighting what matters most from your previous question. You can have a single objective, but you can also have a list of problems that need solving. Both are valid and both can prove your point when it comes to why you're asking for these additional resources. So what I did, I took all these answers to the questions and I put them down in a Google Doc. And I suggest you do the same, straight into a private Google Doc for yourself. And that way, when you're writing the business case in the future, you can just copy and paste some of your answers directly into that business case. It also helps to have all your thoughts in one place as you're going through this process. During my one-on-ones, I would take this doc with me and I would bounce off these answers to my lead and I checked to see if she agreed with me and she thought that these were valid, or maybe that things that I just missed and that she thought I should focus on. And this does bring me to a side note, which is very, very essential. It's really important to have someone during this time that you can use as a sounding board and someone who believes in your vision. And this isn't the quickest process in general, this audit, asking for a team, waiting for the results. It's not quick. And you don't want to run out of steam if you're finding some resistance from stakeholders. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're not going to find these resistance in any of these steps. It's not going to be super easy. Remember Karissa, naive Karissa from 2017, she'd probably tell you that it's easy. But present day Karissa, acknowledges that it can be very difficult and there's going to be resistance as you move along. So find that advocate within your team, whether it's your team lead, somebody who's on your team if you're not by yourself, someone from a different department, or even outside your company with a mentor, someone from this community, somebody who you can pitch your ideas to and make sure that you're clear, concise, and you have a valid argument. I have a team now and I still use this tactic. And I rely heavily on my advocate. For me, that's my director. So I chat with them and I try to find the areas where I can improve my communication styles when it comes to business cases or even presenting data for buy-in regularly from my exec team. Like I said, this is a side note, really not part of the audit, but it's super important. But let's head to this fun stuff, which is, like I said, the audit. So you've answered all these questions to get the base of where your team is, where your main focuses will be. But now you need to dive in a bit to see where you are. You know, what's looking good, the numbers really behind the strength question, and how your content is currently performing. And this is probably one of my favorite parts of this process because it's the easiest. And this is not oh, you've done this before, Karissa. Of course it's easy. No. Like even 2017 Karissa isn't wrong about this, I promise. For this step, you can, grab a tea, grab some water, maybe a snack, and just look over your docs. That's it. You're just looking over your docs with a possible spreadsheet or notebook for notes, but just looking at an examination of your current status. What's an audit, right? So a good audit will probably have about 4 parts, or typically has 4 parts. People and process review, appearance analysis, content analysis, and competitor and industry review. And you may be looking at all this and thinking, she's insane, this isn't easy, but I'm telling you one thing, you are a documentarian. These are your docs. You know them in and out, front and back. This is the type of event you were born to do. You got this. There's no problem. There's no problems at all. But for those of you who are still like, nope, crazy, done, let's dig in a bit to each of these sections and just walk through them. First up is people and processes. So here's what you want to do and focus on the who's, the how's, the with what's. And you're trying to ask yourself questions like, what tools are you using? List them. If you have the prices of them, brilliant. Write those down too. Even better. What processes are you using? How do you go from the ideation of a doc to the publishing? Who's writing? If it's just you, easy, no problem, put your name down. But if not, list their names, list their roles. If you want to get sassy, list their salaries so that you have an idea of what other departments are paying for those roles. And write down how long they've been helping you. How much time does it take to write a single document? And if you have never started or timed writing documentation, please start this now. This is great because it can apply to metrics down the line and help when it comes to hire forecasting once you have a team. I did not do this. I still have a really hard time getting this number because I never made it something that was consistently part of my process. So if you haven't done this already, please start timing your writing this afternoon, like even now if you want to, if you're taking notes, right? I promise you won't regret it. It'll really help clean up your metrics and forecasting in the future. But once we moved on from people and processes, we can go to appearance. Appearance is what you guessed. Is my content visually appealing to my readers? Take a look at your documentation in an incognito browser and really go through all of it like it's your first time seeing it live online. And for some of you, it might be. I know a lot of people like to rely on their preview view and just never really go onto the website to look at it. So if it's not, do it. Incognito it. Go through the whole thing. And you're going to want to ask yourself questions like, how are you categorizing the content? Does it make sense to someone who isn't in docs all day, who isn't working for your company? And if you realize some things are confusing, try looking at, if you have a community, look at your community, look at Twitter, or even support tickets to see what your users are referring to tools or concepts within your product, and maybe change wording or change categorization with that. Are you overwhelmed when you visit the first page of your documentation? So this is a huge red flag because when you're looking at any page, you shouldn't have this, wow, there's so much going on feeling. And if that's the case, highlight those pages that give you that whoa feeling, add them to your low-hanging fruit list, and revisit them when you start going through all of your documents and making those changes. Can you or your user find answers to what you need easily? I once had this awful realization that we have a cookies doc, and when people were typing cookies into the search bar, the article titled Cookies was not showing. And it was just like heartbreaking, concerning, and win all in once. Because once we fixed it, the discoverability issue was gone. So boom, we had less tickets and people were finding the article they needed to find. So look at that discoverability. See if you can find random questions that maybe your users have. And that brings us to tip 1. And it has a lot to do with that discoverability piece, because I've also heard people say things like, I don't have an eye for design. I'm not a designer. I don't know what looks good, but this isn't a problem. For me, my expertise personally go as far as like, is this template look good? Like, I don't have an eye for design. Maybe you see this in this presentation. I don't know. But to help with this, go get a designer friend, or even just a friend who's not familiar with your documentation, your tool, your site, and have them look around. Ask them those questions like, I don't know, can you find a doc about cookies? If you do that, you can see what they do, you can see what they struggle with, see their reaction, and take note, add a list to make change to better that user experience. Now, on to the biggest section of the audit, which is content. And this section is where us documentarians thrive. Here lives the section where you just know things from being in the documentation majority of the day. Also, you'll find things that surprise you from looking into bits and pieces that maybe corners of your documentation you never really went to. So ask yourself questions like, does this content cover the basics of our users? Is it all up to date? Is there anything that needs to be updated right away? Again, if it's yes, add that to your low-hanging fruit list because you can bop those out real quick. How many docs do you have? No. I know at least 50% of you watching this right now, and this is I'm underestimating this, probably can recite the exact number of docs that you have without a problem. So again, another freebie. How many docs do you have? But throughout all these questions, the best thing you can do is remember to recycle, reuse, and repurpose. So much of our content is duplicates or really good information, but just misplaced. So keep track of what you're finding and think, can this be reused somewhere else? Can this doc be recycled, archived, or can I merge this into another article and make an entirely new doc based on the contents? Chances are that if you're not a year 1 startup, there is a lot of content that you can sift through to create multiple documents that would be really beneficial to your user. So don't forget those 3 R's, and it will really reduce your workload in the long run. And the last step is to taking a look at your competitors or those who are in a similar industry. It's important to note that there is a healthy and an unhealthy way to do this. And I have never seen a help center or documentation that looks amazing because the content manager obsesses with what others are doing. So don't get me wrong. You should strive to be innovative. You should strive to be unique and creative. But it's always healthy to have a pulse on what other competitors or people in your industry are doing so that you can keep up to date with trends. So find those in the same industry, similar industry, and observe how they document. So ask yourself, what is something you like that they do? And be specific as possible. Don't just say like, oh, like their content. No. Say, I really like how in depth the content goes when describing this individual tool. And then link that example to refer to it in the future in your notes. Again, we're not striving to be carbon copies of other docs or help centers, but we also don't want to reinvent the wheel every time we're asked to give an update to our documentation. What are things you'd like to avoid? And so these things, we're not shaming other documentarians at all. We can look at the work that they've produced and we can say, hey, we don't want to go down that way, or we don't want to go down that out or use that outlet. We want to do something different. And this is also another win that you can add into your business case, because you can say, this is what this company does, but this is what we do, and this is how it's performing really well. Another win that you can use for your stakeholder to get a visualization of how well you're performing. And what trends do you see coming up? But be aware of why others are making the choices to do this trend. And these documents this layout's happening. So, getting started sections, those are really big. But like, why are they really big? And if you don't know why it's that you're seeing these trends over and over again, ask them. Talk with documentarians. Is it a tip? I don't know. I think it's a tip, but talk with them. We silo ourselves so much when we're getting into our own docs and really come up for air when it comes to any other docs from different companies or different departments. So these types of conferences are really the place to make the connections, get doc friends, and help each other out during the year. And I found the most useful information about documentation not from books and podcasts. Those are great. Keep listening, keep reading. But reaching out to people in the Write the Docs Slack, Customer Education Org Slack, and Support Driven Slack. And having meaningful talks with them, coffee sessions, where we share what we know and just have a general nice chat. And it's a priceless interaction. I've been talking for a long time now, so I just want to give a little check where we are. We've done our reflective Q&As, we've done our audit data, but what's next? I think you know it. Metrics. But also breathe, please. I want to add this here because some people tend to freeze when they hear the word metrics. They get sent back to this world of being very overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, or maybe even like throwing their laptop into a river. But I've been there, and I can tell you that there's a way to look at these metrics without feeling dread. Promise. When looking at your docs, the most important questions to ask first is, what data can we get about our documentation? And I like to divide these into 3 groups. First, we have the basic. So basics include the health metrics, the bare minimum that we should be tracking to get better acquainted with our documentation. So these are things that you can get from Google Analytics. The second group is analytics. So analytics starts to bring in more advanced tools that help you visualize the user's time on our documentation. So analytics tell you what is working, what isn't working, but it visually shows you. So you can watch a user's journey as it happens or see where they're clicking and pair that with your basic metrics. And the last one is user feedback. User feedback and user feedback based metrics. So this tool is like straight up walking to the user with a microphone saying, yo, what do you think? And it tells you key facts about your documentation or your help center, your knowledge base, and right directly from the user's mouth. So I don't have enough time to really go through all of these today, but I really do want to go through feedback because I feel like it's the most important one, especially when talking with your stakeholder. And the reason why is because it's, again, getting the information straight from the user. So the first one is self-service score, and you get that from a sort of feedback, right? Support tickets being sent, or I guess the lack thereof support tickets being sent. And the reason why this is so great is because, one, depending on your score, you can take a look at the support tickets being submitted to your support team and then figure out where your content's lacking. So it kind of gives that feedback loop to you. But also you can convert this into cold hard cash, like I mentioned at the beginning. You just need to figure out the cost the support team is spending per ticket. And then you can send that on your way to the stakeholder and to your business case so that you can say, this is how much I am saving the company. This is how much we are generating by creating this documentation. This is why you need to invest. And the last one is approval rating. And the great part of creating your own dashboard of stats is that you can name the stats whatever you want. So this can be approval rating, this could be health rating, but essentially it's just thumbs up or thumbs down. Zendesk has this built in with their documentation. I know a lot of other platforms do as well, but just kind of looking at that ratio of how many people are giving you a thumbs up versus a thumbs down. And with that, you can get a percentage, and you can do a percentage for each of your docs. So for example, if you have a really good performing doc, you have a higher percentage of thumbs up. So it's doing great. You don't really have to go back to it for maintenance over and over again. Whereas if it's low, you know that you can go back and you need to focus on those docs. So again, looking at the approval rating of your docs, maybe even listing them in the business case to let your stakeholder know, yeah, this is what we need to focus on. We've talked about a lot today. It's getting close to the 30-minute mark, right? So again, we need to make sure that we are reflective with Q&As, we audit the data, and we have our metrics. The next steps are packaging up into business case and writing docs that state the fact. Explain what you're asking for, whether it's more budget for your team, an actual team, or maybe a tool. writing a clear explanation on why it's a no-brainer that you need this resource. And I've simplified the definition of a business case, by the way, and there are other iterations of how you can do this. And there's rounds of feedback, edits, and questions to be answered by the stakeholder, but these are the basics that you need. So start the business case by first looking at, being clear and concise. Don't worry about coming off too strong within the first few sentences. The picture should be painted on what you're asking for very early on. Add those audit metrics. Bring what you found, whether it's written or within a chart. Make it a key feature of your business case. Wow them with what you're doing well. But maybe even drop a few earth-shattering metrics that need to be addressed and will make them be aware of why it's important for your team to exist. Add comments from your advocates. Pull in that advocate that you have, and if you have more than one, the better. But rather than including quotes from them, have them comment on it. So if they're in Google Docs, have them leave a comment, because if they're directly quoted or even leaving comments attached to your work, it speaks a lot more than if you're just paraphrasing what they've said to you before in a call. So let them be present. Let them say why it's important. I know it's a lot. It is a lot. And it's very difficult, but you're not alone. You can talk to us at Write the Docs in the Slack. You can talk to us here at this conference. But we also have the Good Docs Project, which is where a lot of the business case template has come from. And so you can find us at thegooddocsproject.dev. Basically, we're working on templates for documentation, just to make documentation more available, easier to do for documentation teams. So if anything, if you just want some help, we're a small group of tech writers ready to bounce ideas off of each other. We're there, we're producing content, we're producing materials, we're very hands-on, and we can actually help be the advocate for you if you're needing to chat with somebody about writing a business case. But thanks. Let me know if you have any questions. You can email me. It is listed below, as well as my LinkedIn. Have a good day.
So Emilia and Karissa, welcome. And thank you both for submitting such interesting talks to Write the Docs. I love it that we're in this documentation community and that we can have these really in-depth, almost nerdy docs conversations. So Emilia, I'm going to start with you. My first question for you is, how do you make it easier for other people that don't maintain documentation to actually contribute to this, if you have this docs as code approach?
So I think one of the key points here is traceability that I talked about. Many people, when I ask them, why do you not contribute to documentation? Why do you not correct the bugs themselves? They say, well, I don't really know where that documentation lives, which is a very valid concern. So I think traceability really helps with this, showing people where exactly to edit. But even when giving feedback, you just have to make it very easy. We went from having a small notice in the footer to a really big, obvious feedback button at the top. And that really helped. But another aspect that I haven't really talked about is that you have to make sure that when people contribute or give you feedback, you respond to it in a timely manner, because people tend to remember when things get moving fast and not. So I think this really helps to create this really nice atmosphere about contributing to docs, give people good experience, and hopefully get them to contribute even more.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it works that way with a lot of different feedback fields as well. If people feel like they're actually seeing the difference that their contribution makes, it makes it more likely for them to contribute in the future.
Definitely.
That's true. So Karissa, I guess it maybe kind of leads into a question I had around your talk. You mentioned at some point that low-hanging fruits are a really good place to start focusing. But how do you find these low-hanging fruits in your documentation?
Yeah, so I saw that too, and I was like, oh, that's a really good question. Basically, it depends on what your goals are on your team. So for example, if you're a team of one, so when I started, it was just me, I would go through and it's almost like you have a list going of all the things that you want to make improvements on. I know for me, some of my low-hanging fruit was that the articles for our, a specific tool, were just super out of date, and like this, there were just no screenshots. And so it depends on, again, what your tool is and what you're writing for, but sometimes screenshots are really helpful to kind of explain really technical bits. So like I knew, I was like, okay, I have this doc, and this doc that all I need to do is just go in, take screenshots and add them. So that would be like my first low-hanging fruit. So you'll start realizing as you're going through the documentation of like, oh, this is a really easy job, or oh, this is going to take me days, hour, however long. And it very much depends on what you have to do in all of your documentation to say, okay, this is my low-hanging fruit. So like what my low-hanging fruit of taking screenshots could be a lot of work for somebody if they have 500 docs that they have to do that too, right? Whereas maybe for somebody else, it could just be like spell checking a single section, just really and based on the time you have as well, and just making sure that you're not overwhelming yourself and not identifying things as like, oh yeah, I'm just going to redo this entire doc section of 50 docs in a week. And that's my little. It's like, no, really do baby steps and say, okay, this task will take me an hour, and I know that I will get return on this because of X, Y, and Z. And then you can say, okay, this is my list of little baby things that I can do in order to make improvements.
And I guess it's also nice to have this list because it kind of gets you to start building momentum on maintaining your docs, which Emilia is also the subject of your talk. And I guess that's something else that I was wondering about maintenance. Emilia, you mentioned a lot of good tips, and people were very impressed with the amount of resources that you shared in your talk. But I was wondering, like, what's maybe the one thing if people go home after Write the Docs? What's the one place you tell them to start looking at this or do this one thing if you want to improve the maintenance of your documentation?
I think it would be making it the part of your process of releasing new software. I think it all starts with awareness. If people are not aware that documentation is important and that it needs to be maintained, it doesn't matter how many standards checkers you input or how many checks you add in your CI or like how many metrics you attach to them, people will just not be aware of it. So even doing the small actions, just adding things to your pull request templates that ask you, hey, have you updated the documentation? Have you thought about it? Can like spark a discussion maybe around the PR, or can like flip a switch in people's head to say, this is important. You should be looking at it. So I think it all starts with awareness. So I would say making it part of your entire life cycle of software is the key. And this is where you can build upon adding like all the different things like automation, metrics, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it feeds nicely into the answer you previously mentioned about making the feedback button visible. If you don't even make it visible that you can make changes to the documentation or do the maintenance, it makes it a lot more difficult.
Exactly. I just feel like if you build this culture of documentation is important, it's not just an afterthought. It's also easy to convince people to invest in maintenance because they see how much return you can get and how big of a burden it can be on documentarians, and trying to help them out can really make the world better for everyone.
Yeah. You mentioned something about for people seeing the value. Karissa, in your talk, I think this whole concept around a self-service score generated a lot of discussion in the chat. Maybe can you tell us a bit more about how do you actually measure the self-service score, or is there some tips or techniques that you can share with us how you can work with it?
Yeah, and one of the things I saw a couple of people talking about self-service score as well, and like how it might not apply for everybody depending on if you have a support team or if you're doing something outside of just like straight up technical documentation or written documentation. But my favorite thing about self-service score, and again, if we're talking about self-service score like the Zendesk, like trademarked self-service score, right? It's very specific to what it does. But I like to kind of take a little like creative liberty of it, right? So for sure, it's like you do your self-service score, and we do the Zendesk one as well for our documentation. And for that, it's just we're monitoring the sessions of people coming in, and then just seeing who's going to the contact form and clicking submit at the end of their session. And that's how we get those metrics. But the really cool thing that I just like about metrics in general, and specifically self-service score, is that you can really mold it to what it is for you, right? So for us, we also started moving into more customer education, like e-learning content. So we have some courses as well. But like our self-service score, right, is we're able to kind of see, okay, who visits our courses and who sits there, who takes the course, and then are they within the next 10, 15 days reaching out to our support team or submitting some type of email to maybe our team specifically, right? So we can see, you can kind of like change it up a bit and make it moldable to you. So for example, if you're just doing videos, you could see your video views and you can see the sessions of people watching those views and then monitor it to see if anybody is reaching out. And if you don't have a support team, that's where it kind of gets a little confusing a bit, because you're just like, okay, well, nobody's specifically reaching out to my team, so I don't know if they're self-serving. But again, it's that creative piece where you can look at average time. You can see how long people are on your page compared to when they're not interacting with your content. Even like if your company has like a Twitter account, like are people like reaching out on Twitter? Like what are they doing after they interact with your content? And if they're actually going to the session, getting something out of it, whether it's reading, interacting, watching, and having a successful user journey and understanding what you're writing or what content you're presenting them.
Yeah, it sounds like at least having a really robust Google Analytics type of thing implemented on your documentation helps a lot with.
It does. And like we're at the point where we do, which is great. But like even in the beginning, and I said this as well in the talk, like if you just add Google Analytics and just leave it, you don't have to do anything to it. All of those basic stats that comes with it automatically, where you're not setting up anything custom, is insanely beneficial. Because I know I always go back to this because I was a lone writer for a really long time, and I swear by it. Like the fact that it really helps kind of moving the conversation forward with stakeholders as well, because they're going to be asking those questions. And even if you don't do anything with your Google Analytics, if that one stakeholder comes to you and says, hey, I don't know, I need to know about X, Y, and Z in order to maybe give you more time of day or increase your resources. If you just give yourself a couple hours in Google Analytics, when they ask you those questions, you're more than likely you're going to be able to pull something out just having the basics running constantly. So yes, it is helpful to have an intense setup, and if you have a team that can do that, it's amazing. But if you just have it going, you can get the metrics that you need in order to make a statement that has backup.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking about how you would gather metrics. I think what you've mentioned was a lot on how people consume documentation. Emilia, I'm not sure if you have any idea, is there a good way where you can add metrics if you have docs as code? Is that setup process also kind of set up that you can get metrics from it easily?
I'm not really sure about this. If your documentation gets generated as a web page later on, you can definitely hook things up. If people are just accessing it through code itself or maybe doc strings in their IDE, that's a little bit harder to measure. So I'm afraid I don't really have a good answer for it. But even if you don't have any very specific numeric metrics, it's still worth tapping into maybe your network at a company if they're internal docs, or talking to your clients, because they will be able to give you, if not robust quantitative feedback, you can still get a lot of information about how they use their documentation, whether it's good for them or not. This is how we gathered a lot of feedback in preparation for our documentation system migration. We set up a working group. So even if we did not have numbers, we still had information about what's missing, what people are looking to improve. And that was a very valuable source. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with measuring metrics for docs as code, so I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. But like I said, I think it's a pretty interesting area, and I think if you've given us some valuable comments about talking to your stakeholders and things like that are also very important data points.
And people do. people do generally want to talk about this kind of stuff if you pull their tongue enough. So definitely you should try to talk to people about your documentation, people that you may know, maybe from even different situations.
Yeah. All right. Well, Emilia and Karissa, thank you very much for sharing your insights into documentation and answering our questions. And if I'm not mistaken, then we have a coffee break right now. And yeah, well, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.